Welcome back to Update 4 of Crescent Revamped. Today I'll be going over some of our updates that we implemented into the game. Some of which would be the monologue, UI indicators, and basic user interface such as player health bars or enemy health bars. So to begin, let's start talking with Grandpa here. Let me try. There you go. Well, here you go. I probably won't be reading along with I probably won't be reading the monologue itself, so you guys could probably read along while I press next. But eventually, you talk to Grandpa. The monologue panel pops up, and then the text slowly types out one by one each character. And then as soon as you press next, the next line begins to, I guess, type out itself. This is just a part of the story. Uh, okay, and then so the monologue finished. The monologue panel went down. It's essentially just reiterating uh, information the player should know or is told at the beginning of the game. It's also reminding them that there is a tutorial level called Training Grounds so people can get used to the controls. I probably won't be doing that this update. I did that in the previous update. So I guess to start off, uh, so I guess to show the next piece would probably be the uh, player health bars and enemy health bars. So let's make our way to level 2. Da, 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 da. And yeah, so the UI indicators are also in the map itself where you select levels. So as you see here, we have level 1, Cala City, great naming convention of course. Then we have Crepuscular Cavern. Um, so that's another great naming convention, of course, level 2. And then nothing for level 3 yet. We didn't really get to level 3 yet, which is unfortunate, and we didn't really get to finish off level 2. We're hoping we can get to it next week, but let's start off with level 1 here. As you see here, player health bar. Then let's walk over here. Enemy health bar here. Let's see if it works. Player gets hit, loses health. Oh. Now let's try hitting the enemy. Oh, there you go. Enemy loses some health there. Enemy dead. Nice, nice. And I believe that was just the one of the slimes in the map. Let's see if it. Yeah, there you go. There's the big slime here. Alright. Oh, just dashed into him. Alright, there you go. So, now to talk about how this works, I guess, let's begin with the monologue itself. So, the design is essentially a canvas in Unity, uh, and it's mainly just a panel inside that canvas right here. So we called it main panel, and it just has all sorts of text ranging from the NPC's name, the text you want to display, info goes here, the next button, and then some additional info to let the player know how to uh, move on from this monologue. So, so once the player presses X to interact with Grandpa over there, this panel becomes visible because it was originally invisible or unactive in Unity. So we make it active, um, and then we use a coroutine to open up the, I guess, or lerp the position to. So let's say this is the panel and the player decides to interact with Grandpa. We essentially have a coroutine called open monologue panel that we trigger once the player interacts with Grandpa over there, and then as soon as the player interacts with Grandpa, the coroutine positions the panel to be around here. So in order to do that, uh, we created a float elapsed time and then a while loop to check if elapsed time when elapsed time is less than the max lerp timer, which is essentially just a number we set out to be the max delay on how long we wanted this uh, to lerp, I guess, or to transition smoothly from here to there. So, so while elapsed time is less than max lerp timer, we set the main monologues panel position to a new vector 3, where we take its original x position along the x-axis, but then we use a method here called mathf dot lerp, which is essentially like vector3 dot lerp. Um, but then what this does specifically is it takes the original position, and then it takes the position you wish for it to transition to smoothly. So let's say this was at position 0, and I wanted it to be at position 1 here. Uh, Without a lerp, if you just set it straight to 1, it would just appear like this, straight up, like no type of smooth animation to it. It would just look like this essentially. So I could have just had we could have just had the panel like this, and just it would basically look like this. It would just it would stay in the same, or appear out of thin air essentially. So what the lerp does is it takes the panel's original position along the y-axis, so -50.4, and it transitions to a new position along the y-axis, which we named open monologue position. This is a number we set out, or we initialized at the beginning of the script. I believe this is, yeah, 65. So this goes from -50 all the way up to 65. And so right about there. So the lerp mathf.lerp allows it to transition smoothly, essentially. Uh, I don't want. I'm probably gonna go quickly because the last update was 40 minutes, so I'm probably gonna try to explain how the actual monologue works. So we used a queue, which is what they call it in Unity, which is essentially like an array of strings, uh, but you can always expand on it, if that makes sense. You can always expand on it. You can create new ones within that. You can create new, let's say you have a sentence. Uh, with an array, you can only kind of have one predetermined sentence, whereas with a queue, you can make multiple different sentences in the script itself without having to really declare it. Like, uh, you can, how can I explain this? Uh, you can basically create a lot of sentences from the same queue essentially, but with an array, you would probably need to create a different array to display a different sentence, whereas this one we could all have it all under one bracket here, which is monologue sentences. So a queue is essentially a way to do such a thing. It still takes strings, of course, so it's similar to an array. There's other ways we could have gone about doing this. We could have used, I believe Unity has something called like list or dictionaries. We could have used that. There's multiple different ways. People have done dialogues, monologues just using arrays. These functions built into Unity allow it to be more efficient in a way. So we create a queue, and then once the player uh, determines that he wishes to speak with the NPC, we begin the monologue. So we set the monologue name text to whatever the NPC's name is. We remember to clear the sentences because we don't want to show previous sentences. And then this is essentially uh, this for each loop is essentially what shows us the next sentence in the queue. So if anyone has heard of the word queue, I'm assuming anyone watching this video has heard of the word queue and what its meaning is. It's essentially like a line uh, of thing or objects of things, any type. Like it could be a line of people, and that's technically a queue. So it's pretty much the same concept there, except we're just using strings. And in these strings, we have sentences. So it's essentially the same thing. So we're using a for each loop, and then the monologue, we have a string monologue sentence in monologue sentences. So monologue dot sentences. So it's saying for each sentence in monologue dot sentences, uh, load in the next string in the queue, and this is what on queue does. It loads in whatever is next. So let's say string one was meant to say hello, and then string two was meant to say how was your day. So this would allow you to transition from hi to how was your day. And we can visibly see this in Unity itself because I believe, I think it's in monologue, we created a public string called NPC name and then public string of sentences. And then this is text area is essentially how many lines width and height can we actually type in? I believe, let me just, believe it should be here. Uh, NPC. Yeah, so here you go. So you have the NPC name, sentences, and essentially what that text area does it increases this text box element to allow us to actually enter in more words. What it originally was just like one line, and I doubt anyone could fit in a sentence in that. So I feel like if I were to delete that, it would look like this now, which doesn't really look the best. You can't really, it's really hard to edit sentences like this when it's just one line. So we increased the text area to 4 by 10, which is essentially the minimum amount of lines and then the maximum amount of lines we wish to use. Yeah, minimum lines, maximum lines. There you go. And then we have a public string of sentences, which are right here. I don't know if I saved it, so it went back to normal. Oh yeah, there you go. So here you go. So these elements are actually our sentences. So uh, we have a total of 6 sentences here. It starts from 0. This is generally how arrays start in C sharp or C++. If we were talking Lua, it would start from 1 and so on. But generally, it should start at 0, so that's normal. Okay, so hopefully that was a little bit hopefully that made a little bit of sense with the monologue. Uh, so next would be the UI indicator, which works just like all of our other type of indicators. It just displays an actual user interface. So how this works is, let's see if I could find it here. Uh, okay, yeah. So once the player enters a trigger and stays within that trigger, so triggers are essentially colliders that we put on objects that don't interfere with the player. So like if the player were to run in this ladder object here, it wouldn't fling them back and restrict them from actually touching the object since it's a trigger. So once the player enters this trigger, we check if our boolean we made UI open is equal to false, and then we immediately set it to true. If you watch the previous updates, you would know this is I like to call this the debounce. This is what I've learned to call it. People may have other names for it. It's just to immediately, because if this debounce wasn't included, there would be a million different instances of the same user interface being shown, and it would look like a nightmare. And I could show you right now. I always like to show why debounces are useful. They're probably one of the most useful things in game development, and I can show you why right now. So, as you saw before, when I got close to those triggers and it would show one user interface, one instance of that user interface, that was because of the debounce. Without the debounce, well, we're talking a different story, pal. So, so essentially, since this is looping, and there's nothing stopping it from looping, it's gonna make a million of these instances, and it's not gonna care if it's not gonna care about your performance at all. You could have like 5 frames a second, it won't care. It'll still make more instances. So this debounce is justified. Debounces are justified. So essentially, we made a boolean called UI open, and we immediately set it to false. And then once it is false, so if it is false, we immediately set it to true to avoid it from looping, as you saw there, and creating a million different instances. And then we have a variable named spawned UI, and this is how the UI spawns in the direction of the player. It's actually a prefab that we call either map UI pop-up, specifically dedicated for map levels, or house UI pop-up, specifically dedicated to interactions within the house. So we immediately set it to true, and then spawn UI. We spawn in the UI. We instantiate it, of course. I I don't know if anyone has watched the previous update, but I could not pronounce this word for the life of me. Uh, Even though I've used this multiple times, I've pronounced it multiple times. But yeah, instantiate. So we take the UI pop-up here, which is essentially just a transform in Unity, which is set to it's a public transform, and how we get it to work is essentially we have I believe we so UI pop-up. Sorry, this is there's a lot of lines here to go through. It's kind of hard to find stuff. So UI pop-up. So we have a public transform named UI. Oh yes. So UI pop-up is actually a public transform, and it's a prefab that we drag into the script. So this right here, we drag this prefab into the player, as you see here, house UI pop-up. Yeah, I got a little bit confused there. It was a script was a little bit colluded. Uh, okay, all right. So lost my train of thought. Okay, so we spawn that in, and then we set its position to the player's position, which is game object in this case. We set it to their position on the x-axis plus 3 units to the right, and then uh, well, to the right, if it's positive, it would go to the right. If we subtracted it, it would go to the left of the player. So in this case, it would be to the right, and then on the player's y-axis, uh, move 3 units up, and then a and then we keep the position on the z-axis the same. and then the rotation relative to the player. And then we parent that to the UI game object here to um, organize everything, organize all the user interfaces together. And then we set the title and level, in this case, to whatever the player is colliding with at the time. So if the player is colliding with grandpa, uh, the name's going to be the grandpa's name or whatever it is in the hierarchy. We named it NPC. We can name it grandpa in this case. Yeah, grandpa. So if we play the game now, I hope I see. Oh no. Yeah, let me just put that debounce, save that back in. Okay, so we named grandpa grandpa, and now he's grandpa in the UI indicator. Talk to grandpa. Yeah, and then so that's what the level.text does. And then title.text is essentially just some brief info that we have under the uh, objects you can collide with, which are just text objects that we name title. And in this case, it's just quotations, quotation marks, and then in between it's just whatever we wanted to say. So in this case, talk to grandpa. It's a lot of talking to grandpa. It's probably the most. Uh, okay, so and then next, I believe, was the player health bars, which are in the character itself. I should probably load the scene so I could believe it was scene or level 1. Yeah, there you go. So player health bars were pretty simple. Uh, Essentially what we did was we took an image. So we created a canvas, of course. We called it canvas, health canvas. And then we took an image and turned it into under here, under image type. Uh, Unity sets the image type to simple. But there's actually a type where you can turn it into fill, and what this does is it allows you to input a certain amount from 0 to 1 on the fill amount, which makes it look like it's filling up a bar. So what we did was we did that exact same thing. We took an image, made it green, uh, made the image type to filled. So rather than simple, we made it filled. And then we changed the filled amount from 0 to 1 because it's a health bar. You don't want to start off with 0 health. And then the fill origin, we made it to the left. You could also do it from the right, but that would be kind of weird. Yeah, so we made it to the left. We made it horizontal. Vertical would look like this. I don't. That would be quite a unique health bar, I would say. So we make it horizontal, fill origin from the left, and then in order to actually calculate what the player's health is, we have two variables. One is the player's health, and then the other is the initial health. Kind of self-explanatory. So the player starts off with 150 health, but since the player's health is always changing, we don't really have a constant max health set out in the game. So, or a constant max health variable. So we don't know, the game doesn't know what the player's health originally was. So that's where the initial health comes in. We set that to 150. That doesn't really change. If we truly wanted to, we could have made this a constant variable, constant float. Uh, but we decided to leave it. Um, okay, and then how we actually calculate uh, the fill amount, so for this to actually lower down or raise back up is, let's see if I could find it here. There's a lot more stuff in the character script. Let's see. Maybe I could try searching for it. Control F is my best friend. Let's see. Health. Yeah, there you go. So here's the uh essentially all the if statements used for the health bar. So the game checks if there is a health bar at all. So if there is a health bar at all, it would check if it was there. I believe health bar in this case would be a public image. We initialized that as a public image, and then we dragged the health bar. Yeah, health bar. So we essentially just drag this over here, and that determines what the health bar is. And then, so if there is a health bar at all, then function like a health bar. So in order for it to actually function like a health bar, we calculate the health bar's amount, which is essentially the the player's health divided by the initial health. So whatever the player's health is at the time divided by 150, which is what the player's initial health was at the start. And then it we take the health bar and then the fill amount, and then we make it equal to whatever the uh, calculated health bar amount is. And if the player's health is greater than 75, we set the health bar's color to green. If it's less than 75, we set it to yellow. If it's less than 0, then the player is dead, essentially. That's also another thing, is essentially is we made a death user interface. Sorry if I'm using the word essentially 30 times in a row. Uh, it's kind of hard to talk on the spot. Kind of new to this. So we also made a death interface. So that appears when the player dies. Uh, so let's just keep dashing into the enemy, hoping it would kill us. So yeah, there's the yellow. And then once the player dies, this interface pops up that clearly states the player is dead. And then you could either press retry or just go back to the map itself. So in this case, I guess we'll just go back to the map. But it's essentially like how the monologue panel works in terms of showing itself, but it just doesn't have the same it doesn't use lerp, so it's not transitioning as smooth. So the previous demonstration where I showed if the panel did not have a lerp, where it would just appear out of thin air, that's essentially how that works. So we just immediately set the object to active. So here you go, death panel active, and it won't show there, but it'll show here because it would be, I believe, right here in the scene view. Yeah, but in the actual game, it would show in the middle. So yeah, that should be it. This is probably like another 40-minute video, I assume. Oh no, 28. I could see it in OBS. I'm becoming a pro at this. At least it's not 40. Last update was 40 minutes. I felt like I was dragging on, but at least we finished a little bit early with this update. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next update.